Okay, so let's take a look at question number 45 tonight. So question number 45 says, does the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine promote drunkenness? And so, the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine is in John chapter 2, and it is the very first miracle that Jesus performed. And it is a very interesting miracle, too, because when you look at it compared to the other miracles that Jesus worked, it's kind of like the oddball out in a whole bunch of different respects. But, kind of getting back to the question about, does Jesus turning the water into wine at this marriage feast, does that kind of promote drunkenness? Because some people kind of say so. But when you take a look at the Bible and you look at Old Testament, New Testament, you see that being drunk is a sin. I mean, in the Old Testament, it's forbidden in the law. New Testament, you see that in several different sections in the Bible where lists of sins are given, and they're really bad sins and really big penalties for it. Drunkenness is in there. And then we've got Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 18, do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. And so, here we've got all the Bible saying don't be drunk, but yet is Jesus doing something that is going to promote drunkenness? Okay, well now you can kind of see where the crux of this question is heading up to. And so let's take a look at, first of all, the miracle itself, okay? And so in John chapter 2 and in verse number 1, it says, on the third day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Dear woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. This is one of the things that makes this miracle really interesting, is because the other miracles that Jesus does are things that he does to point to the fact that he is a Messiah. But here is something that Jesus' mother is coming up to him and having him do this miracle that is really taking care of the situation at hand. Because we look at this and say, oh, well, they ran out of wine. But back in that day and time, this was a really big, bad, embarrassing thing. So their marriages, the way that it normally worked is that when there's a betrothal that took place, and then the groom would go and get his bride when everything was taken care of, go get his bride and then bring her back to his house that he's prepared, and then there would be a procession of people that have all been invited. And so this procession of people would come, they'd have signing of contracts, and then they would have this marital feast. There would be some fasting and different things like that. But then they'd have this feast that would last anywhere from 2 to 7 days. And so notice that this is on the third day. So this is the third day that after Jesus came out of Judea. This wedding had probably been going on for a number of days, and to run out of provisions would be something that would be very, very bad. I mean, it's very distasteful. It's very embarrassing. It would be something that would kind of hang over this couple's head for a long time. In fact, when you come to the wedding, you're supposed to kind of bring some provisions with you as well. And so, one author that I read talked about where the mother said they have no more wine. The disciples just coming up from Judea. He just kind of speculated that maybe the disciples really weren't invited as much as Jesus and Mary and the family. And because after all, Jesus and the disciples had just gotten together. They're in Judea, and them coming up, what kind of provision did they make? And so other people there, maybe nothing, coming empty-handed, running out of wine. And so was that the reason why Mary requested this? Well, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't say that, and that's just speculation. But it was kind of interesting. But for him to say, dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. There's Jesus, almost kind of saying, I don't need to be involved in this. This isn't what I'm here to do. But I think because of respect for Mary and just simply for Jesus, submitting to his mother down through his life, even though he's older in his life at this point, he goes ahead and does it. And so his mother said to his servants, do whatever he tells you. Notice that he didn't even say, okay, I'll do it. But it says, nearby stood 6 stone jars, the kinds used for Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after, but your guests have had after the guests had too much to drink, but you have saved the best until now. And so this is the first of the miraculous signs that Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee, and thus he revealed his glory, and his disciples put his faith in them. So even though this wasn't necessarily like the other ones, it had the same effect as far as to the disciples. Now, when we read this on the surface, we would say, oh yeah, here are these 6 big pots holding a large amount of wine. The master of the banquet is saying, after, you serve the best wine first, but then after everybody's had too much to drink, implying the fact that they were slop-noggering drunk, then you bring out the bad stuff and they don't know the difference. But, he's surprised that he brings them out first. And so if you look at it that way, you say, oh yeah, Jesus was promoting drunkenness because he was, egging it on here at this feast. But you have to understand what wine was back in those days, and you have to understand how people used wine. And then when you understand the culture and the customs of this day, you'll realize that this is not what was going on at all. What was going on here is that when somebody had wine, and it's not just simply in Judea or Galilee, it was all across the ancient world. Well, not all across the ancient world, all across the civilized ancient world. People would mix water in with their wine. Okay, and so at the very high strength, it would be like 3 parts water to 1 part wine. On the other hand, it'd be about 10 parts water to 1 part wine. And so what you're talking about here, number one, is something that is very, very, very watered down. Number 2, you've got to realize that the process of making wine was not for the process of making wine, it was for the process of preserving grapes and grape juice. You don't have refrigeration, and so they would make wine, and that natural fermentation process really capped the alcohol content of the wine off at about, the equivalent of what our beer is. And so our wine today has a lot higher alcoholic content, and what they did with the lower alcoholic content was they mixed it with water to make it go farther. Because if you think about it, wine is going to be a very valuable thing, because you got to go and you got to pick grapes, you got to crush them, you got to make it, you got to make the wine, and so you want your wine to go as far as possible. And secondly, wine wasn't just simply for the taste, wine also had a very practical use to it as well. Because if you think about it, the water that they had was very unclean, very unsanitary, very unsafe to drink, and one of the easiest way to make water safe to drink was to take wine and put into it. Okay, and so that's what I'm saying is they did it, to make water taste better. They did it for the safety of water. They did it to make the wine go farther. When you look at the Old Testament, you come across passages of wine and strong drink. All right, the priests, in some cases, were not supposed to have wine or strong drink. The wine was really the wine mixed with water, and the strong drink was wine straight up. Okay, or wines mixed with 1 part water. So if you had 1 part water to 1 part wine, or wine pure wine, that was something that was considered strong drink back in those days, which is really the equivalent of about our beer. Now, as far as the civilized world, doesn't matter if it's Greek or Roman or Jewish or whatever, that was the case. The only people that would have drunk their wine full strength as strong drink would have been the barbarians. And so, you know, in the ancient Roman world, that was something that the barbarians would have done unless you were doing something as far as like, you know, a Roman party. And then, you know, people were out to get drunk. In Jewish parties, in the case like this, you know, it was against Jewish custom and against the law to do this. And so for the people of the at the marriage feast to say, yeah, we're going to be getting slop, you know, falling down drunk at this party, you know, that really was not something that was culturally acceptable in those days, especially for religious people that were following the law. And so, you know, for Jesus to come and change the water into wine, we need to look at it like this. In verse number 10, where the master of the banquet said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. This is not too much to drink as far as them being drunk and they don't know the difference. This is somebody who has had a whole bunch of taste of wine, and now they really don't care what it tastes like. You know, have you ever done that before? You gone to, you know, just gone to a party, you get a Coke, right? And you drink it and it tastes good. And you go back and you get another one and you drink it and it doesn't taste so good. And you go back and get a third and you're like, yeah, this is okay. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? You know, have you ever been at a picnic or something, and the more sodas that you drink throughout the day, the more that you're like, I really don't like soda. Okay? And so that's what this is. And that is that people would say, okay, we're putting out the really choice stuff first when people can really appreciate it. But now that, you know, we're starting to dwindle on down, we're putting out the worst and worse and worse. But notice what this is. And maybe because it's fresh, you know, I don't know. But whatever the case was, it was something that the master of the banquet was like, hey, this is the best right now. You say the best, that is the best tasting for now. And so, you know, for somebody to come up and say, oh yeah, turning the water into wine, that is Jesus just giving, you know, a pass to drunken parties. When you read this on the surface with our culture and our customs, I can see where people would look at this. But we've got to remember that, you know, they didn't live with 2020 customs. They lived back in the day. And back in the day, you know, they just didn't do that. They didn't do it for religious reasons, and they didn't do it for cultural reasons. They didn't do it for practical reasons as well. Okay? All right, anybody else got any thoughts on that one?
Buy me a maple cream thing at Deerberg's. Oh.
You can't even remember that. What else? What was in that maple cream thing? Where did you buy that? In what section?
Simon's saying, I want some of that.
Chloe, now that we've been interrupted, are my mic levels okay?
Yeah, they're great.
All right, okay, very,
They're
very good.
Cut it out of the entire section.
Yes, I'm going to cut it out. Okay. All right, so here we go again. Question number 45.